Welcome, everyone. We'll just wait a moment to let everyone join the webinar from the waiting room, and then we'll get started. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Lori Tellerico, the Adult Community Engagement Coordinator here at San Francisco Public Library. Thank you for joining us for tonight's program. Before we get started, I have just a few quick housekeeping items. This program is being recorded and will be available for later viewing on our YouTube channel. We will have time for audience questions later in the program. We'll be using the Q&A function to post your questions. You can find the Q&A along the bottom of the screen. If you hover over the bar, it should bring that up for you. And library staff will be monitoring the chat. So if you have any issues, just let us know and we can assist as needed. Before we begin our program, I'd like to pause and ask for your attention for a brief land acknowledgement. The San Francisco Public Library acknowledges that we occupy the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. We recognize that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland. As uninvited guests, we affirm their sovereign rights as First Peoples and wish to pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush community. We're so glad that you could join us tonight for our next On the Same Page author talk. On the Same Page is San Francisco Public Library's citywide book club, bringing readers together every 2 months to explore a shared book through book club conversations and author talks. Tonight's program explores the immigrant histories woven through Orphan Bachelors. Fae Myenne Ng joins us in conversation with Ben Fong-Torres. What happens when immigration laws leave generations of men cut off from family, home, and a sense of belonging? In Orphan Bachelors, Ng draws on her childhood in San Francisco Chinatown to tell an intimate story shaped by the Chinese Exclusion era. She reflects on her parents and the isolated men who surrounded them, showing how policy becomes personal, shaping identity, responsibility, and survival. Blending memoir with social history, this book offers a powerful meditation on inheritance, resilience, and the long emotional afterlife of exclusion. Fae Myenne Ng is the author of the award-winning memoir Orphan Bachelors, winner of the California Book Award Gold Medal for Nonfiction and the William Saroyan International Prize for Writing in Nonfiction. She is also the author of the novels Bone and Steer Toward Rock, and she also teaches at UC Berkeley. Ben Fong-Torres is a longtime journalist and editor at Rolling Stone, author of 10 books, including The Rice Room, Growing Up Chinese American, and an Emmy award-winning broadcaster. We're so glad to have them both with us tonight. Please join me in giving a warm virtual welcome to Fae Meynne Ng and Ben Fong-Torres. And I'm going to turn it over to them. We're going to start out with a reading.
Great. So I think I'll just start with a few pages from the prologue of Orphan Bachelors. You don't need to know anything. We can talk if you have questions after. In our childhood, my sister and I heard no fairy tales, no love stories. We only heard tales of woe. Women cried, men bled. In China, everyone went crazy from unrelenting grief or committed suicide from unrequited love. Those who survived became gambling or opium addicts, or just plain mean. In China, women jumped into wells and polluted the family water. In Chinatown, they jumped off the roof of the Pingyuan project, so we never felt safe in the playground. In China, butchers were revered masters of the cleaver. In America, every butcher was handsome because they were among the few males who stayed to work in the ghetto. We learned that the story's function was to protect. Like a kung fu disciple, the easy life made a lazy student, and the hard life made a grand master. Our parents didn't believe in bedtime stories, a story that lulls you into dreaming. Why waste time telling a story that didn't terrify and teach? Stories were for waking you up, not putting you to sleep. Stories were forewarning so that we didn't venture into danger. Stories were amulets to save us from committing wrongs that could cut us down or worse, make us lose face. When our mother told us about the Japanese soldier whose bayonet found her in the tall grasses, or about the thugs at the Ping projects who dragged her friend into a waiting car, we knew not to ask why or what happened next. Curiosity only got us a dozen whacks with the chicken feather duster. Our mother was teaching us about vigilance. If she didn't offer the story's ending, it was better not to know. Asking was disobedience. Children didn't need to know the whole story. Be careful, be safe, stay alive. That was the only story. My parents couldn't read my novels in English, and when translated, found the simplified Chinese frustrating and gave up. A seamstress who could sew up copies of dresses from sight alone, a sailor who could endure the silence and solace of the seas. Their whole lives were consumed with work for the family. They did not want to read a copy of the original. This teaches me that translation is not only the art of deference, but also of defiance. And that immigration, like any departure from land or language, is the supreme sacrifice. Inside the home, Mom taught us to call our father Der, an ancient pronunciation that was long and low, as if pulled from the shadow of the moon. Ma and Dad taught me to speak and write beyond the story, even beyond translation. They didn't always get along, but they taught me how to get through life. When painting a tiger, first draw the bones. When building a house, consider the wind. When writing, consider the vessel of time that holds a story. Maybe that's also a guide on how to read this book. When reading, honor what you can't fully inhabit. This book has no simple timeline. I've left our fissures in because what can't be known or forgiven is part of our history. I've written our hopes and disappointments, and also our illusions. I've tried to respect the unknowable and also the untranslatable. I have borrowed from life to make the story come alive on the page. Borrowing is the word my father used to cajole understanding. Of his own life, he often said he was borrowing to stay in this country, to stay in this family. As a child, I believed his stories. As a writer, I write his lies. So perhaps this book can be, as my father was, an alien resident.
Mm,
On to you, Ben.
that was Fae Myenne Ng, and that was so good. I'm going to read the same thing. Where's my copy of her book? All right. Okay, here's my own prologue from the Rice Room. I have no idea when it was published. Somewhere in
94.
what?
1994.
I'm glad somebody has memories. Okay, so the prologue. Mine reads like this. I was walking with my father on 8th Street in Chinatown, Oakland, toward the dim sum restaurant where Mama was waiting. Around the corner on Webster Street is where our restaurant, the New Eastern Cafe, used to be. It was spring, and my father had been ailing since last summer. How's your foot? I asked. The same, he said. Then he added, I sure can't lift 100 pounds anymore. Old days I'd carry sacks of potatoes. And onions, I said, remembering the red net sacks. And rice, he said. Always there was rice. That's all we said on our 2-block walk, but I felt excited. It seemed to be as much as we'd ever said to each other. I thought about a remark my brother-in-law, Dave Watkins, had made once when we were talking about language barriers. Dave married my sister Sarah and had it none too easy being accepted by my parents, who wanted their 5 children to marry 5 Chinese. And here was the first child running off with a bakui, a white devil. David said he felt okay. I don't really know how your mom feels about me, he said. And your dad? Your dad would be a great guy to know. He seems like a regular, fun loving guy. I would love to be able to talk to him. Yeah, I said. Me too. Over the years, I've spoken with my parents many times, but we've never really communicated. When we talk, it sounds like baby talk, at least my side of it. They converse in Cantonese. I pick up the gist of it, formulate a response, and am dumbstruck. I don't know half the words I need. I either never learned them or I heard but forgot them. The Chinese language is stuck in its own place and time. When we were growing up, we learned to say police in Chinese, luk yi. That means green clothing, which referred, we would learn years later, to the uniforms worn by officers in Canton. There were no Chinese words for computer, Watergate, AIDS, recession. When the telephone was invented, the Chinese, who concocted so many things that the rest of the world had to find words for, simply called it electric line. What we have here is a language barrier as formidable as the Great Wall of China. The barrier has stood tall, rugged, and insurmountable between my parents and us. And it has stood through countless moments when we needed to talk with each other about the things parents and children usually discussed: jobs and careers, marriage and divorce, health and finances, history, the present, and the future. This is one of the great sadnesses of my life. How ironic, I would think. I'm a journalist and a broadcaster. My job is to communicate, and I can't with the two people with whom I want to the most. The barrier stood heartless and unyielding when we suffered the first death among us, when we most desperately needed to talk with each other, to console and to comfort one another. Words failed us. And yet, that death led to the first chipping away of the language barrier. Through a family friend who acted as interpreter, I was able to talk with them about their lives in China, about their early years in Oakland, about their goals for themselves and their family. I talked to my parents for our entire family to allow us to have a good long look over that wall. I also did this for my parents to give them a chance to learn a few things about us, things we'd never been able to express fully with all intended nuances. For so long, I wanted to tell them the most basic things: why I chose the work that I did, what that work involved, why I didn't marry the Chinese woman they wanted me to, why I married the woman I did. I'd wanted to let my father know that his children admired him and that I, in particular, learned from him and traced my own successes to him. And I wanted to explain the conflicts we felt growing up, both Chinese and American, and the choices I made of not only wading into the American mainstream, but also into the counterculture of the 60s. I wanted to explain the frustrations my siblings and I felt over the obligations to our restaurants throughout our young lives. They never understood why most of us ultimately rebelled in one way or another, but we had our reasons. We had to deal with numerous contradictions in the instructions they gave us. They decreed that we would succeed in school and in white collar careers, but we would also spend after school hours studying Chinese and doing chores at the restaurant, leaving little time for homework and next to none for socializing. We were torn between obligations to our parents and the freedom we naturally wanted. I didn't explain all of this during our conversation, but we had a sense of many missions accomplished. I learned enough to tell my story. It is an equally Chinese and American story. It is told by the son of a mother who always wanted the best for me and of a father who worked endlessly throughout his life. As it turns out, my brother in law was right. He is a great guy to know.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for reading that. That's I love that opening. I meant to quickly thank for both of us all the work that Lord Talarico has done and Rachel Griffin's Garrett, who's been handling all the book clubs. And also San Francisco Public Library. This is a tremendous institution in the city. It was a block away from my home in Chinatown, and it was a paradise to me. And it was also the place of my first job. I worked in the catalog department, which as a 15-year-old was fascinating because it tracked all the books and the whereabouts. And so I got to learn about a lot of books. But let's talk about our books and about, the times that we've met 2 or 3 times. But, you have been an institution yourself in Chinatown. You were the Grand Marshal of the Chinese New Year Parade for what, 2 decades?
I was the co-anchor on television of it for about 24 years.
That is amazing. That is amazing. So in this passage that you read, what was so striking to me was you have interviewed all the musical greats. You have led us through the parade. And here in this moment, you are saying to your parents, tell me more, tell us more, your beautiful phrase. And the generosity to listen, tell us more, tell me more. And the beautiful way in which you describe the fog of understanding not every word, but feeling more than the word, so that your parents, come alive in this mysterious but such a beautiful way. We feel their time and their strength and their struggle and the muscle of all their work. There's a quietness. They waited for you to come to them and say, tell us more. And I thought that was such a beautiful way to open the book.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, what a strange feeling to not be able to explain specifically what you did for a living. They would hear from friends, and kids of friends would tell their parents, who then told my parents that he was working for some kind of a magazine, and that's as far as they got. Maybe the word hippie got in there, but my parents didn't necessarily know what that meant. They knew nothing about the 60s counterculture. They knew nothing about student protests or protests against the war. And so we would come back sometimes, having participated in something like that during the daytime hours before having to report for duty at the Bamboo Hut or whatever restaurant we had going, and not be able to tell them what we had just experienced, how we're feeling, what we want to do about it. They just want us to cause no trouble. Just work hard and you will be good. Be a good son, be a good daughter. That's it. That's all they cared about.
And in that prologue, we also get a sense that they trusted all 5 of you.
I don't know. I'm not sure about that, because as we got more and more frustrated with being really, really involuntarily forced to work, to show up at the restaurant and do all the chores until closing time, and then we're supposed to find time to do our homework. During those years when we were doing homework, we felt cheated. We felt robbed. And on top of that, we didn't get to stay for social activities. Somehow, surely, my younger sister and I were able to, I don't know, just manage to, maybe through trading hours. Maybe we asked Barry, can you fill in on Wednesday so that Ben can DJ a party that he's not even invited to, but he would have fun playing music for these, kids. And so we worked it out so that we had a chance to do some school activities. But it was hard work. And I think Sarah was the oldest, to escape. She was going to Cal. She was sort of into the beat scene to a certain extent. She was a girlfriend of Dave Watkins, and they got married. So that's nothing that my parents approved of. And Barry, they were watching over because he was the number one son. And so they were protective of him. And he suffered a tragic death young in life. And so that was another defeat for my parents. I hate to use the word defeat. It's not a competition. But then that left Shirley, my younger sister, and I to do the bulk of the work at the restaurant. Our younger brother, Burton, chipped in as he could, but he was a little bit too young to do a whole lot of work. So, no, I wouldn't say that they felt like they got a lot of good from us. They forced it into us, except that years later, I realized, I think most of us did, that it was for our good. That we learned about family, loyalty, about work ethic, about responsibility. I turned chores into playtime and did sports play-by-play as I was throwing snow peas into the paper bag, just keeping track of my scores as I'm peeling prawns, but also watching and listening to the radio. The radio was my savior. Baseball and top 40 radio. And before top 40 was pop and R&B. So I got something out of it, but it was not easy.
Yeah. Well, you had a creativity, and I think that came from your father as well. He was very creative. He was almost like, he was a chef, but he had this creativity. He would be able to taste candy and then make it.
Right.
And Barry had the same, quality. He wanted, you both wanted a radio, and he made that first radio. And
Oh yeah.
this is such this ability to create where there was nothing is part of the immigrant spirit.
Well put. And you had the same thing going on your side, on your family.
Yes, I was the oldest, and so I was responsible for all the young, if anybody did something wrong, it was my fault. So I had to really keep everybody in line. I wanted to mention to our attendees, we're happy you're here, that Ben and I decided that we were going to give more time to the Q&A because Ben so generously came to my class, Siblinghood in Asian American Literature, and everybody just, I said, Ben, 20 minutes. Ben stayed like an hour and a half, and he answered questions and he gave so much, and they were so thrilled. They're all here. They have more questions. To answer, so the other thing I wanted to mention is we cut the second reading, which was my reading selection was about Angel Island, which was an excerpt in Harper's chapter 2. And Ben was going to read the section about his mother on Angel Island, which is really unusual. There are not a lot of stories about women on the island. And so I really liked that section of your book as well, because it's untold.
I was not aware that the women's story was largely untold.
Yeah, it's not, there were not many women coming through Angel Island. The women didn't want to come. They decided to stay in China. So this was, quite unusual and courageous for your mother to come.
Wow. I feel like I'm with Henry Gates here, discovering my past.
So what was also impressive to my young students was that, you have gone through so many modes of creativity, and you said to them that you are a lucky guy. There was no bitterness about what you didn't have, but you saw yourself as lucky, and you told one student, do what you want, have fun, which is not something, I think my parents are of the same generation as your parents. My parents are maybe a decade younger, but they were of the same mentality. Life was really hard because they came in under exclusion. You and I are both exclusion babies. I'm also a confession baby, and that created a certain kind of mentality. We were not wanted here, and we were of a generation that was not supposed to exist. My father's line, his ranting line all through his life was, the Exclusion Act was a brilliant piece of legislation because it was bloodless. You didn't have to kill any Chinese. You just made sure no Chinese babies were born. But yet your family, there were 5 of you during the 40s, which is really, really unusual. And did you have a lot of young friends? There were not a lot of young children.
Me?
Yeah.
Well, we were born in pretty much Chinatown. That is, we were on 8th Street near Alice, and we were surrounded by young Chinese kids. Lincoln School was the main elementary and junior high school, or middle school, I suppose they call it now. And the population was largely Chinese American, but also substantially other races. And so if you were open to the idea, then of course you had friends of all colors. And so I did. Um, and my parents did not approve of that necessarily. You know, some of my best friends, I hate to say some of my best friends, but a number of my pals were Japanese Americans. And I would not be able to take them home or to the restaurant or to, anything like that. My parents would blow a gasket probably because their feelings about the Japanese were so strong from wartime. But yeah, we surrounded ourselves with friends of all colors. I would say the same thing applied for my siblings. So it was just socializing as much as we could.
Mm-hmm. And what was it like for you to move outside of Chinatown? Because you're one of the first to, and my students were so impressed that you were comfortable, just moving in white spaces, moving among musicians, interviewing the greatest of the great. There was no inferiority complex, no fear. You were there to do a job. Tell me more. And you
Yeah,
did a job.
I don't know, Faye, what the deal is with that. Diane has told me when we have been together, married 50 years as of tomorrow, and she said, Ben, I've never seen you with stage fright. You're not afraid of anything. And I said, well, there are moments like in front of Fae Myenne Ng and her class. Wow. But yeah, by and large, I've always welcomed being in a public of some sort. And it's been said, I've been reminded that the reason I ran for student body president at Westlake Junior High School 1 year or one semester after having spent a year in Texas with my father at his restaurant on Route 66, I come back into Westlake Junior High School for ninth grade and win the presidency of the student body. And all because a teacher said, you could be a good president and you get to lead the Pledge of Allegiance at the assemblies. I said, be still my heart. All right, I am so there. Can I also maybe build a new ballroom? So even then I knew what I was destined to be. But yeah, it seems like I've always enjoyed talking and writing and stuff like that, partly because of the experience at the restaurants, being stuck with radio and music and other people, good writing by other people, including humorists, as well as journalists and fiction writers. So I had a lot of input.
Very good. Very good. Did your parents also encourage you? Did they say you talk too much, which was, in a lot of Chinese families, don't talk so much, don't be so noisy. Did you go to Chinese Cantonese opera where there was so much noise and so much
Yeah.
music?
We did go to opera. You mentioned my father being talented, and one of his things was that he liked to come when he came back to the restaurant. If it was slow, which it often was, he would break into a mock Chinese opera song, and I would respond, and we would make fake swords and knives, swords primarily, and have some fun that way. But my father was also a very accomplished calligrapher. I don't know how that happened. And as you pointed out, he was able to taste something and duplicate it, not even knowing what the ingredients are. He would fake his way through it until he got it. And he made candy even sometimes. Just an amazing guy and a pretty good sense of humor. And so I believe I extracted, I was inspired to a large extent by my dad, Ricardo Torres.
Right, right. I am impressed with that generation because they had so much creativity that was not expressed, but it was compressed through manual labor, and your father had that. His quietness, he also had true artistic vision, and it passed on to, your sister Shirley did incredible work in Chinatown, with her books and with her cooking tours. Barry had a kind of dedication and devotion to community. So, that comes from, I think, your parents.
Hmm. I agree. I agree. But what about you, Faye, and your parents?
My parents were very creative. Um, and when I think about them and how they inspired my work, they didn't read, as the passage mentioned, they don't read English.
Hmm.
My father learned his English by being cursed at by drunken sailors. Um,
Yes,
so
I,
that's a certain kind of English.
I heard some of that around the Far Eastern too, or New Eastern.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, well, but that when you showed your creative mind and gift, did they encourage you, or did they know about it even?
I think they encouraged all of us to do what we wanted.
Mm.
I was never told to, study to become a doctor or, whatever,
Yeah.
my students are told to do. I was never given directions on what to study. I was expected to do what I wanted. So I had a lot of room. So that's why I talked about trust. I think they trusted me. They were too busy
Hmm. Hmm.
telling me to do this and that. They
Yeah.
expected me to know. They expected me to do, the right thing. And they expected me to take care of my siblings.
Hmm. In society, it seems like, and it's not just Chinese who have those feelings about women, girls versus boys. The boys are expected to become white collar professionals, and the girls are supposed to be secretaries and nurses and ultimately get married and have a family. And that crosses different racial lines, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. My parents didn't have the space to be directly creative, but it was distilled in everything they did, in how they cooked. My mother worked in the sewing factories, and she would be able to sew incredible dresses for my sister and I. And, she had a creative intention and devotion to line and eye and texture.
Mm.
I picked up, and when before I started writing, I went to UC Davis and I thought I'd be a textile designer and then hire all the sewing ladies. Give them so my kind of thinking as a child of immigrants, of working class immigrants, was how am I going to take care of them? How am I going to give them jobs? It wasn't how am I going to take care of myself,
Hmm.
necessarily how um and so this brings us to the idea of escape, leaving our home, leaving our family. And you talk about that in Rice Room, and you talk about it just, wanting to go and to those parties and feeling obligated. And my students are all interested in this. How do you balance obligation and self,
Yeah.
obligation to the past and truth to your own self desire? It I think especially difficult for Asian Americans.
Yeah. I think I just had to suppress my desire. I clearly had it and acted on it in the sense that, for example, trading off time slots with my siblings so I could take an evening off. But because I was not part of the social scene, I was liked. I know that, but partly because I wasn't part of the party scene. And so when I went to an occasional gathering, as I think I said in my book, uh, I tended to ask more questions than talk about myself. And that probably had a connection to what I ultimately did in life, asking questions, uh, although I didn't take notes at the parties. Um, and I didn't spread gossip or anything. It was just I was a friendly ear to a
Mhm.
lot of people who knew me, who were familiar with me in the classroom. Probably I was a class clown to a certain extent. And so they could confide in me and not worry about my spilling secrets. And so that's how I socialized. And then because they knew I loved music so much, I was hired by a couple of these kind of sorority social clubs to be a DJ at one or two or three of their parties, their themed parties. And so I did that. And
Mhm.
that gives you a certain amount of standing. You're the provider of the music for a dance party.
Mhm.
But beyond that, then I was commissioner of assemblies, producing the monthly assemblies of student body, and did that for a semester and did quite well at it. And that was my springboard, probably, to be more serious about producing media, shows, entertainment, variety, and all that stuff came to the fore in my semester as commissioner of assemblies. And I've never really talked about it, but now that we're discussing this part of my life, that does come to mind.
Mm. And what gave you the courage to enter these spaces? Did you prepare? Did you, before the interview, was it at all emotional? Like, what am I going to say to Diane Keaton? For instance, you interviewed, which was fantastic. And I imagine, what would you do as preparation if you were to interview Bruce Lee? Can you take us through that? What happens in your mind?
Yeah. Well, research back then, we're talking about the 60s and 70s into the 80s, was quite different than it is today. Today, you have access to um, technology, and you can just ask your phone something and get a dossier on a particular star, a Wikipedia page or entry. Back then, you just scratched around and got whatever you could from the publicist, or maybe there were liner notes for a previous album. You go to see the movie or watch the show on TV and write down some notes, and then you just try to come up with the natural questions, and at the same time, questions that may not be ones that they're being asked time and time again. So you're
Hmm?
looking for some originality. And yeah, I've always told journalism students that you need to just show respect by having done the research so that
Right.
you're not asking them the obvious questions, the ones that they've had to deal with for their entire tour of interviews. And so, and then of course, try to not follow a rote set of questions and instead look for those spots where you can become conversational. And that's
Yeah.
where I think tell me more comes in. So that
Hmm.
they don't just answer a question. Oh, okay. And the next question is about school. No, it's not like that. Well, tell me more about that person who bothered you so much at the parties. What's the problem here? Let them tell you something that they haven't talked to others about. And so that's what preparation is. But yeah, back then it was totally different than it is now. But I still use all of the. I'm about to interview in a few days Delroy Lindo, and he's an SF State alumnus, as well as an Oscar-nominated actor for Sinners. And he has also been, like me, an alumnus of the year. And he is going to attend, he's going to go to SF State. He loves to engage students in conversation and tell them his lessons in life and as an actor for the past 50 years. And he has such an enormous heart. And so I'm going to take the opportunity to interview him myself for the Q&A feature I do for the alumni magazine twice a year. It comes out twice a year. So I am preparing for Delroy now, and I am going to finish watching Sinners and watch The Five Bloods, and maybe remind myself of some other stuff he did earlier in his career, both in theater and in movies, and now on television. And so then I will have a list of questions, and then hopefully I don't have to use them too much. Hopefully we'll have a conversation, and he won't be answering the same old questions about what it was like to be nominated, and now what it was like not to win the Oscar.
Mm, mm. I understand the quality of listening you're talking about. You really listen and then you engage, and then you can be very surprised at what comes out. And I wanted just to show the audience, this is probably where you say that your father had incredible calligraphy. And here is Ben Fong-Torres' Chinese name Look at the calligraphy there. Can you see it? Did you see it?
Oh, no, we can't see it because you have a virtual
Oh,
background, so it makes it very hard to
oh, okay.
Ah,
see.
Well,
Sorry.
Ben Fong-Torres has, I don't even know. All I can read is Fong. But you
hi.
mentioned your father's incredible calligraphy, and did he teach you this?
This is my father's calligraphy.
Oh, that's amazing. Do you know where he learned this? Where did he?
No, it was a natural gift. He certainly did not go to night school.
That's
There are two panels of this, and
yeah.
it flanks a lovely scenic shot artwork from China. I think I asked Gordon Liu one time to translate it for me, but I've forgotten what. I think it maybe says no credit cards. Whatever.
Well, I have students from Wuhan. I'm sure that they saw that and they'll put it in the chat what it means.
Okay.
Um, so are we moving into Q&A?
Yes, it's just about time for Q&A. Thank you guys for that wonderful conversation. We have some questions in the Q&A box. Let's see. The legacy of Chinese exclusion era runs quietly but powerfully through the book. What do you think is still misunderstood about that history?
Okay.
Well, I would say that it is a long exclusion has a long shadow. It's something that we are still feeling, responding to, and suffering from. And the most important thing is to understand that it lasted for 61 years, and that's 4 generations of the unborn. And I just want to mention, we imagine all the artists that were not even born.
Mhm.
Your father, my mother, they managed to still be creative. But let's just think about the unborn artists, the unborn beauties of thinkers, 4 generations, 61 years. It lasted for 61 years. And then there was a little exclusion from 43 until 65. 105 Chinese were allowed in. That is 9 Chinese per month. And that in no way balanced the sexual imbalance, because in the 1880s, I think it was 21 men to 1 woman. And then not until the 20s did it change. It was still at least, I think in the 20s, it was 12 men to 1 woman. So if we think psychologically, what that imbalance of the sexes does to our own sexual history, it is unthinkable.
Okay, I'm going to move on to this question because it's kind of related. Confession and exclusion were really dominant forces in the shaping of Asian American experience. Did you notice any later forces which shaped Asian American families and lived experiences?
This is yours too, Faye. My parents didn't go through confession.
Yeah, exclusion and confession were huge. What else happened? Well, just off the top of my head, there was what was that called when um, there was the busing situation in the late 60s, where there was a lot of controversy about busing children into other neighborhoods, and it just, that's one important thing. Can I get the names of our questionnaires?
Yes, yes. This one was an anonymous one,
Okay,
but I will read their names as I do them.
great.
Anything else to add on that one?
On to the previous remarks that Faye said. I think my parents were in danger of being part of that, becoming an orphan bachelor for good, because my father arrived here in 1927. It says here, and he did not. His friends encouraged him. Come on, get going, guy. It's 1940 now. He's been in the country for 13 years, hasn't made a move toward scoring a chick. And so my father was 37 in 1940 when he finally, family back home in China, began to scout women for him and offer him some choices. And so then he got going. But yeah, that was fairly late in life, for a guy. But he spent his first 10 years basically working at restaurants and establishing a sort of a very, very modest business, a restaurant of his own. He just didn't feel ready at that time to deal with women and family. But I'm certainly glad he did.
That is a traumatic situation where there are no women in the country for you to socialize with. The idea, the feeling that intimacy was banned, in America, that you would go back to China just to pick. This kind of legislation was brutal. I'm glad your father did go back.
Yeah, me too. You'd have a blank screen here otherwise. All right, Lori.
This next question is from Mariah Tabuno. She's one of Professor Faye's students. And it's for Ben. You mentioned you wanted to communicate your love and affection for your wife to your parents. As someone who is dating outside of my culture, there has always been an unspoken expectation of dating a Filipino man imposed by my parents. How did you convey your happiness with the woman you love to your parents?
It was hopeless. I should go and grab a photo from our wedding party, our reception. I should have used it in the rice room, where my father is standing kind of off to the side of the nightclub thing at the Alexis restaurant. And he looks like as stern could be, as stiff could be, kind of almost just kind of snarling at the photographer, Annie Leibovitz, by the way. He still looked fantastic, but still it was clear what his tude was. And so, no, I would say that through the experience, just as with my sister Sarah and her husband Dave, the walls never really came down. They tried to be civil. They tried to be friendly at family gatherings, holiday get-togethers, or whenever I bought Diane home for something, but it was hopeless. No, they never got over it. They were what they were.
Mariah was one of the hosts of the one of the MCs for the class, and she asked a beautiful question because she's inspired by the fact that you are celebrating your 50th anniversary. I mean, who even makes it to 5 years?
Really?
But so she's I think she and her generation are asking, how do you develop and maintain a relationship despite these kinds?
Well, I suppose what comes to mind is that in your get-togethers and gatherings, that you show that this is working, that you are indeed part of a great couple, that we have found happiness. We have done something that we assume that you want us to have achieved, which is to find happiness. And that she is a worthwhile member of the larger family. And so give her a chance, But display affection, camaraderie with all of the family as much as you can. You can't stand some of the cousins, then, don't try. But reach out to the parents and, hope that they come around. It's different with every person, of course. But if you express that you have achieved something that you have wanted for your life and that you hope that they share in that happiness, that's about all you can do.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Mariah. And I just want to quickly say thank you, everybody, for coming. These questions are So how many more minutes do we have, and how many more questions can we get?
We have a lot of questions, so we'll try to get through all of them. We can go a little late if we need to. There's no problem with that. So this is another anonymous question. I'm hoping that Faye will talk more about her feelings about the bitterness of her family. Has writing all she wrote softened the feelings for the past?
Ah, very interesting question. I didn't think of bitterness as I was writing the book. I was trying to collect the memories and the textures of the memories. So it's interesting to feel the bitterness. There are many, many hard moments, incredibly hard, heartbreaking moments, and I wanted to write them as they presented themselves. Perhaps one example could be there's a scene, a few paragraphs about my great-grandfather committing suicide in an SRO. And I didn't witness this, but I wrote the paragraph, the passage as if I did. My mother discovered my great-grandfather. Now, way after I finished the book, my sister told me that she saw my mother's face after she discovered the hanging body. And I asked, well, where was I? And this is way after I finished the book. But in the book, I write a whole passage about my father taking a sea voyage to Hong Kong, 7,000 nautical miles to buy snake gall, which they understood would rejuvenate her courage, because her courage was snatched away when she discovered her grandfather. And this was so romantic to me, you know, just sailing 7,000 nautical miles and getting to the wet market, getting the snake gall, scaling the side of the ship, the vessel, because, you know, crew could not, you know, just board. You climbed a rope ladder up the side. And this was extremely romantic to me. And that's what I saw. I didn't see my mother after she saw her grandfather. I saw my father present her with the snake gall. So perhaps that's a way to say that was what I tried to create, a feeling that was very complex.
Okay, this next question is from Casey Lee. Your family members experience the same events you write about, but from different perspectives. Have they read your work, and have any of them challenged or disagreed with how you've portrayed things? And how do you reconcile that?
This is for Ben?
No, this is for you.
Oh.
Yeah.
How do I reconcile that? This is my perception of history and my memory of events. So I don't feel that there's anything to reconcile. It's, you know, I stand by the story that I tell, and
This is where we're kind of divergent. Faye is a creative writer. She's a literary writer, and so she uses her imagination sometimes to fill out scenes and dialogue. I come from journalism, and so I was not comfortable with trying to be in my parents' shoes at certain critical moments in their lives, nor my siblings, nor friends, nor anything else that I wrote about. I tried to nail down the facts and stick with them, even though I believe the resulting product is far less colorful and interesting than someone like a Fae Myenne Ng can come up with. But you know, but it meant though that my siblings didn't have a leg to stand on. They couldn't complain about how I depicted certain events and people because they knew, well, they helped me. I interviewed them to get the information. I never went beyond their interviews or others to embellish a scene or a time. So
right.
That's my feeling about it.
And adding to that, I think the question is asking, how do I face those difficult moments in my own life where the perception is complex and painful and has the potential to be cruel if told. I think, am I right? Is this person asking, is this person a writer? Is this person asking, how do I tell the truth? And whose truth matters?
That was lovely how you sum that up. I'm going to throw it over to Rachel. She has a question from our book club.
So the question from our book club is, was there any hesitation in opening your family's history to the wider world, and what guided your decisions about what to reveal versus what to keep for yourself?
I kept nothing.
You kept nothing for yourself.
My answer has always been that I did not seek to do this, but I had done a book for Hyperion, and the editor, Leslie, said, "Hey, Ben, guess what? We have an idea for you. We have a lot of women now writing both fiction and nonfiction and doing well, but we don't have an Asian American male who has told his own story near that level. And how about you doing it?" I said, "How about you shut up?" Certainly my parents would tell me that, because one thing I do know is that my parents would not want to have their story told. And so, they're just private people, and that's the way that generation was. And so it was difficult to convince them to let me say yes to it, and of course interview them and my siblings, and my mom at one point said, "Well, can you just write about the good things?" I said, "Sure, Mom. Fairy tale will come true." I had to just go and work on it and be true to the original idea of it, meaning be true to the truth. And they came around, friends and family told them what the book was about, told them some details, and they came around. I'm quite proud of that. But it was not easy going early on.
I think that is so amazing that your parents were trusting enough to take secondhand readers and say, okay, Ben must have done a good job, because who knows? This was my worst nightmare, that these poor, readers would go to my mother and say, oh, you know what? Faye's written a book about a suicidal family and an adulterous wife and a seafaring loser. And the first book was fiction. So I flew home, out of a snowstorm, a nor'easter. And I said, I have to talk to you. This novel is coming out. First, I had to figure out how to say novel in Chinese. What is imagination in Chinese? And, my poor Chinese was, imagination was, it comes from the brain, or, no brain, so I simplified the whole novel bone to help them understand this book was written to honor how hard you worked to raise us. I had to keep it really simple because my Chinese at that point was diminished. So what you're saying, I think what this conversation is getting to as well is, how do we tell our own truth and also the group, the family truth, the cultural truth? And in Orphan Bachelors, it's not just one book. It's about history. It's about the history of one family that was not supposed to exist. And it's a book about writing and teaching and hearing stories. And so it's a combination. And this is how Chinese people of our generation, you got 3 jobs. Why make it simple? Make it really complex. Drive yourself crazy. Why do you think it took 15 years? It was not simple. Does that answer the question?
Wow. Well said.
Or several questions?
Yeah. You answered enough for our next session.
Okay.
We have a few more questions. Do you want to keep answering them, or do you want to conclude? Okay.
No, go away. No, yeah, sure. A couple more.
Okay. So this next question asks, this is from Michelle Jeffers. What are the parallels you see to today's immigration crackdown? So what parallels can you bring from your stories to what's happening today in our world?
Huh. You know, I'm not sure about Faye's family, but our family did not face a crackdown. There were not people, there were not agents lurking around Chinatown, infiltrating meetings, and setting up a spy network to get information on certain people and families. We didn't feel that kind of pressure. I feel for the people who are feeling that pressure now, especially those who have already crafted a decent life here in America and are having it upended for no really good reason.
These are always good questions. This is a very current topic, and I think both our books explore what it felt like to be ostracized, to be, let in after not being let in. I mean, in Ben's book, his mother is on Angel Island. His father goes to Texas because that's where he could get a job. That's where he could get this is, truly, the American story.
Do you have a last question, Laurie?
I do. Okay, so this is from Pri Patek. It's a little bit of a long one, but it's a good question. Um, in your lives, did you take time to understand your family history and how? Did it come through a meditative pause, or was it within the political tumult of your particular careers? For Ben Fong-Torres, I know you were surrounded by the rock scene and started writing at the Rolling Stone pretty much right out of SF State. For Professor Faye, you were at Berkeley studying English surrounded by the anti-war Vietnam protests and the free speech movement and the Asian American movement. Um, what do you think of politics in relationship to our Asian American lives? And what do we do as young Asian Americans, writers, readers, lovers, and scientists?
Hmm.
Bree asked you about classical music. He was in the class.
Yes, I remember Pre. Uh-huh. Um, terms of family history and stuff like that, I feel like I've kind of answered the questions. I will tell you, though, that I was very lucky in, I think it was 1990, to go to China as part of an entertainment troupe and was able to do a detour in Fushan and go to the home village. And knowing that I could possibly do that ahead of time, I did, of course, talk to my parents with the help of Gordon Liu and got as much family history as I could and where they were, who, what might still be alive, what the relationships are to our uh, mother and father. And in the short time I had uh, in Czech Ham, is what they called it back in the old days, the village, uh, I got I got a lot, and I was grateful for that. Sadly, was not able to go back again because I was able to spread a lot of information to my siblings on return, as well as to my parents, and got photographs and stuff like that. So that was invaluable. Um, I am now the last of the five siblings. My parents are gone, and so I feel even more important to uh, keep track of all the stuff I gathered in China and for the rice room and from the Chinese New Year parades too,
Mhm.
and make sure that they have a wealth of that information. Thank you.
Beautiful. And I love that section in the book where you talked about you married it with the time you went to China as a 3-year-old, and you have an incredible memory as a 3-year-old.
Oh yeah, I did remember some stuff. I was with Sarah and my mom going to
Mhm.
Hong Kong and China. Yeah.
Mhm. It's wonderful. Pri is an extraordinary artist, and his question is classic Pri. So thank you, Pri. You did good.
All right. Well, thank you all for spending your evening with us and for being part of our On the Same Page community. A huge thanks to Fae Myenne Ng for sharing her instincts, insights, and stories, and to Ben Fong-Torres for guiding such a thoughtful and engaging conversation. I do want to remind you about a related program we have coming up on Wednesday at 10:30 a.m. We have a workshop on finding Chinese ancestors using the My China Roots database. So if you're interested in researching your Chinese ancestors. We hope you'll join us for that. We're also really excited to be part of the One Book, One Coast, a multi-state reading community, connecting readers all along the West Coast. This year we're reading They Called Us Enemy by George Takei, and we hope you'll join us for the related programming we have planned and a special virtual author talk with George Takei on May 31st. And then I did want to remind you, next weekend at the main library, we'll be showing 2 films as part of CAMFest. CAMFest is the nation's leading showcase for films from Asian America and beyond. We'll be showing The Only Language She Knows, featuring San Francisco poet laureate Jenny Lim on Saturday. And then we'll be showing Defiant to the Last, Resistance at the Tule Lake Jail on Sunday. And then I just want to let you guys know our next on the same page selection for May and June will be Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. We hope you'll read along with us and join us for the upcoming discussions. Thank you all for being here, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening. And again, thank you again, Faye and Ben.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you. Thank you, Luke.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Happy anniversary, Ben.
Ah, thank you.